This is our fourth lecture on Congress, and in this lecture, we're going to be beginning. We won't completely cover, but we're going to begin looking at congressional elections. And what we're going to start off with, a lot of it is not going to sound exciting or all that consequential at the outset, but I think as you will see, there are important consequences and interesting facets of congressional elections. I said what's going to start out not exciting is we're going to be talking about the scheduling and frequency of congressional elections. Now, before we start any of this, you need to understand and always remember that only states conduct elections. So we talk about how they are actually run, the people, policies, those are up to the states. Right? The states count the votes, for example, and that has been certainly one of the most highlighted roles of state governments in elections for federal office. And of course, that's what we are talking about here, elections for federal office, specifically congressional elections. These are required by the Constitution to be held on the Tuesday after the first Monday in November in even years. And that is something to remember. It has from time to time shown up on important tests, and I will make sure that it is something we know, so make sure you get it written down correctly from the outset. Otherwise, lots of students think it's the first Tuesday in November. Could be, but not necessarily. We need to distinguish, also in talking about this, notice they happen in all even years. Presidential elections happen also in even years, but only every 4 years. So we need to distinguish between presidential election years, which coincide with congressional elections, versus midterm elections, which are congressional elections without, of course, as you might have guessed, a presidential election. I think it's telling that the other term for midterm elections is off-year elections, okay, with the implication being that these elections, they're off years because they don't happen when that supremely important presidential election occurs. I say that's telling because I think it shows us the increasing primacy of the presidency within the federal government. I mean, Congress is the first branch. It is the branch with the most written about it. It is the branch that is the subject of the very first article of the Constitution. And so there's lots of reasons we would think that congressional elections are the main show. Presidents just happen to get their place in them every 4 years, but in the current environment, we think of them as off-year elections. They get less attention, and we'll see that that has important ramifications. First thing to point out is that turnout in presidential election years is higher, and usually substantially higher. And one reason this matters right away is that presidents sometimes have coattails, and notice that sometimes is italicized, and I do want to highlight that. Okay, coattails is the idea that support for a winning presidential candidate will result in greater support for what we call down ballot candidates, so candidates who are farther down the ballot. Because in presidential election years, at the top of the ballot, the first thing you will vote on is candidates for president and vice president. Everybody else is below that, and hence down ballot. You do also need to be clear here that we're talking about support for a winning president of one party can result in more support for down ballot candidates of the winning president's party. And just as a visualization, the idea here is that other candidates ride into office on the coattails of the winning presidential candidate, or the winning presidential ticket, since there's also a vice president on there. This is not always the case. Certainly the political cartoon down here, and to be clear, this is from Donald Trump's winning election in 2016, not in 2024. Yeah, sometimes the candidate really doesn't bring significant coattails with them. It may be that that president is personally popular. The party they represent may be less popular, for example. There can be other dynamics here. One thing that I want to mention here also that is a distinct reason, perhaps, that some presidents lack coattails or significant coattails is there's an argument in political scientists that at least some voters may have what is called cognitive Madisonianism. Step back there, which means that even perhaps at a subconscious level, or can be conscious, they have a preference for divided government. They want to see those Madisonian checks and balances in place. So they don't want to give the presidency and control of Congress to the same party. So they will split their ticket, meaning they will vote for presidential, vice presidential ticket of one party and a representative to the House, perhaps if it's the timing lines up, also a senator of the other party. This certainly can also come back into play at the midterms, but we'll come back to that. So one of the issues with midterms is, as we now often think of them as off-year elections, turnout is lower. When there is not a presidential candidate on the ballot, fewer voters turn out. They just see it as a less important election, definitely playing into that off-year terminology. And so that means a few different things. And I know we haven't really talked about elections. This is kind of how things go in government. We often have to get the cart ahead of the horse some of the time. Turnout has become one of the most important issues in U.S. elections, especially for federal offices, especially for president. The more excited people are about a presidential candidate, the more they turn out to vote not only for that candidate, but also you have this coattails effect of bringing more support for those down ballot candidates. When there is lower turnout, often you see reduced support for whatever party it was that won the presidential election and may have brought coattails of the same party into Congress. And so all that's messy. The key point here is that typically the party of the sitting president loses seats in Congress, in the House and the Senate. How much they lose them in the Senate can depend on lots of things, because remember, we only elect 1/3 of the Senate at a time. But here also, we may have that cognitive Madisonianism. Right? It may not just be lower turnout. It may not just be that, say, a president has become less popular in the first 2 years of their term leading up to those off-year elections, although that is often the case too. It may be this cognitive Madisonianism. Voters want to limit the policy power of that presidency by electing members from the opposition party to Congress. I've already alluded to this, but do also need to point out very clearly there is a difference between House and Senate elections in these every 2-year races. Remember, every single member of the House is elected biennially, meaning every 2 years, every member of the House is up for election. So, in theory, right, you could get a completely new House. That does not happen, but every House is new in the sense that we've already seen this already. We number Congresses. You will get a new Congress with a new Congress number, and especially in the House, you get a new majority. You can get new rules for that Congress. Sometimes those rules can have large impacts. The Senate, in contrast, is not completely up for election every 2 years. Senators serve 6-year terms compared to the House members' 2-year terms, and we only elect 1/3 of the Senate every 2 years. which means, obviously, without turning this into too much of a math class, 2/3 of the members will carry over after the election. It will be the same people that were there before. For this reason, the Senate is referred to as either a continuing body or a continuous body. It doesn't have those huge rule changes. Rules in the Senate can, of course, change. We've already seen that discussing potential changes in the filibuster, the nuclear option. But the Senate, again, is a continuing body and seen as a source of stability in the federal government. Well, in these congressional elections, what does it take to win? Well, the best way to give yourself good chances, excellent chances of winning an election is to already be a sitting member of Congress, to be what we call an incumbent, the person who already has that office. And if we look at this, let's try and move some things. There we go. The bar graphs in purple show re-election rates. This is the re-election rate in the Senate. This is in the House over a span of 60 years. And if you look at the re-election rates, they're very high. In the House, we never have a re-election rate that dips below 80%. And sometimes it reaches very close to 100%. In the Senate, it's perhaps not as strong. We have several years where it's below 80%. We have a year where it is below 60%, and others where it is in the 60s and 70s. It can, of course, reach as high as 100% re-election rate. But in any case, those are very good odds of an incumbent winning re-election and keeping their seat. And these are also not wins that come by razor-thin majorities, right? What? Actually, sorry, that's a misspeaking on my part. Remember, in Congress, there's never a bad time for me to remind you of this, especially because, as you can see, even for me, who's done this for years, it's easy to lapse. Remember, to win a seat to the Senate or the House, you do not need a majority. You only need a plurality, which perhaps makes this part that I was getting to even more striking. Members of the House and Senate do not typically win their re-elections by a bare plurality or even a razor-thin majority. The margin of victory since 2012 is huge. In the smallest year, it's still over 25%, and in 2016 and 2014 was over 33% margins of victory. This is for House elections, so it does not specifically touch on Senate elections. One of the things we will see is that Senate elections do tend to be have smaller margins of victory than in the House. But the point of all of this is re-election is a high probability event for incumbents, and margins of victory, especially in the House, are typically quite large. I guess I should have clicked that before so that you know an incumbent is the current office holder. If you're doing things right with notes, you had written that down anyway because I said it, even if it wasn't on the screen. Re-election rates and margins of victory, however, are not the whole story. There are members of Congress who stay in Congress for decades, but often they still leave. So one of the things we need to consider is how long they have been there, and you can see some fluctuation in this. The overall trend has been towards members of the House and Senate staying in office longer and longer. So the incumbents are winning more re-elections to result in this longest tenure, although obviously in neither case is the tenure currently, or for the 118th Congress, I should say, as high as it has been historically at other points. And so the direction, who knows where it will go next. Well, if incumbents have such a high probability of winning re-election, we need to understand why that is. Because obviously it's not just enough for me to say, well, if you want to win a seat to Congress, you should have already won a seat to Congress. To understand why members of Congress who are incumbents win re-election at such high rates, and especially in the House with such large margins, we need to talk about something called incumbent advantage. And we call it incumbent advantage, but that is really a cluster of several separate advantages. And we'll talk about these not necessarily in any particular order, but first up is credit claiming. So this is taking credit for things you have done while serving in Congress. One of these things is something that is not exciting at all, and that is casework. That's things to help constituents. It might be helping someone get an appointment to a military academy like West Point. It might be helping somebody deal with a missing Social Security check or error in deposit, helping them deal with some problem with a federal bureaucracy. Staff do a lot of that. Members of Congress claim credit for that casework. And you can see some of the examples of that: Military Service Academy nominations down here, community project funding requests, veterans, help with grants. Remember, if we think back to federalism, grants are incredibly important. And if you can help direct grant money to your constituents, that is certainly something you can claim credit for. I'm not saying they shouldn't be able to claim credit for it, but that is something that they can do that if you're not in Congress, you don't have the opportunity to do. There are, of course, also the pork barrels, which we've talked about, especially in the context of helping legislation move forward. So this is getting money funneled to your district or your state. Some of this can also be in regards to your legislative record. You can tell voters, look, these are the policies, these are the laws that I have helped to pass, these are the laws I have supported. Now, whether or not a member of Congress claims credit for their legislative record is going to depend partly on what kind of seat they have. If you are in one of the few remaining very competitive districts, you may not want to talk too much about your legislative record because policies that you have supported that some of your constituents may agree with may be opposed by a similarly large number of constituents who did not support that policy and would not like to know that you voted for or sponsored that piece of legislation. But in what we call safe districts, okay, or safe states, right, safe seats in states, whether we're talking about districts, of course, for the House, states for the Senate, if it is a safe seat, it is a seat that is in a solidly red, meaning solidly Republican, or solidly blue, meaning solidly Democrat, district or state. If you know you've got a majority of your co-partisans in your district or state, then you really want to trumpet that legislative record to remind them why they should continue to support you. There's also position taking, and this is related to credit claiming. This is where you come out publicly with your position on different key issues, maybe gun control, abortion, taxes, the environment. And again, how much position taking you do is also going to be related to how safe your seat is. There's also advertising. And when we think of advertising, we think of paid advertisements, television ads, mailings, all kinds of targeted internet advertising. But it's not just those things that are paid for. Members of Congress have tools for free advertising. I mean, for one thing, they get covered by the news over the course of their term, whereas an opponent may only get any kind of coverage in the months leading up to an election. But beyond that, there are things that we typically don't hear as much about. The franking privilege, not an see if I can get my mouth to cooperate, exciting sounding thing. But what this allows is members of Congress can communicate with their constituents by mail without paying any postage. They simply need to put their name on the mailing, and it will be carried through the Postal Service to its recipients at no cost to the member of Congress. There are also targeted digital communications, especially if you sign up for notifications from a member of Congress. They can, and some are more sophisticated about this than others in terms of their operations, they might send you emails or text messages very much tailored to policy areas, policy positions you've expressed an interest in the past. So they can constantly remind you what they're doing, what's going on, to give you reminders of why you should support them in their re-election. All of this gives incumbents name recognition, and I've underlined that because it may not sound important, but name recognition is huge. A lot of people, studies show, people are more likely to vote for a name simply if they recognize it. It doesn't necessarily have to be attached to any other positive feelings. People are just more likely to vote for a name that they have seen before and remember. And challengers have a lot of trouble getting that same name recognition among the voting population. There is also the issue of campaign spending. It's a trite saying in at least American English that money talks. And money in campaign spending certainly talks. The story here is actually a bit more interesting than just the cynical idea that money talks and whoever has more money wins. Incumbents actually have less need for money because of all of those previous incumbent advantages that we've talked about. And they don't have to spend money to get their name out there and to get people to remember it. So they have less need for it, and at the same time, they typically have more of it. Whereas challengers have more need of it and are less able to get it. And this is especially true, the money part, in House races. Members of Congress build up war chests. Again, the money advantage is always, we talk about this, remember, it's especially true in House races. The war chest discourages challengers. They can see how much money they're up against. And that amounts of campaign money an incumbent has is a matter of public record. These things are reported, and so a challenger can look at how much money an incumbent has piled up, and a lot of challengers at that point just look at it as a losing cost. Why would they put themselves through the humiliation of running a losing campaign? And they just don't enter the race for that seat at all. Adding to this, not only do incumbents have less need for money, usually have more of it on hand, they are also more able to raise more money when they want to, or feel that they need to. And as a result, when necessary, incumbents can outspend their opponents handily, usually by a ratio of 2-1. For this, to help understand the role of money and to illustrate some of these points here in the other notes, these blue lines in this bar graph represent spending in congressional races. The yellow is presidential, and we're not talking about those. And the amount of money spent, it's not been a completely steady trend line, but the trend has been to more and more spending. So money becomes increasingly important in congressional races. In 2020 and 2024, exceeding $10 billion. Let's look here particularly at our own member of Congress, our own member of the House, Sam Graves, and I will use him as an example frequently. You know that I've already done this. To be clear, as we talk about this, none of this is political on my part. Sam Graves is your representative in the House, and he has a safe seat, and he certainly has these campaign spending advantages that we see in general. And this is from 2024. These are kind of two different ways of seeing it. Sam Graves was the incumbent. He obviously won that election. Okay. He raised nearly $2.8 million, spent over $1.7 million, still has cash in hand approaching $2.5 million. And so this included after the 2024 race. His Democrat opponent, Pam May, it's nearly a laughable comparison in terms of raised less than $20,000, spent nearly all of it, and had only this left on hand after that unsuccessful race. It's not always as clear as this, but in a lot of ways, Sam Graves, with his safe seat and his incumbent advantages, is a fairly typical member of the House as we talk about incumbent advantages.